Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. On Snoozecast, we read excerpts from public domain works and occasionally original stories. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please review us on Apple Podcasts and also share it with a friend. This episode is brought to you by someone holding the elevator door for you. Tonight, we'll be reading an excerpt from Mark Twain's Following the Equator, sometimes titled More Tramps Abroad. It's a nonfiction social commentary in the form of a travelogue published in 1897. The book is critical of racism, British imperialism, and religious intolerance. Twain found himself nearly bankrupt at the age of 60, so took a lecture tour of the British Empire to generate funds. Thus, this book was written. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Chapter 9. It is your human environment that makes climate. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. September 15th, night. Close to Australia now. Sydney, 50 miles distant. That note recalls an experience. The passengers were sent for to come up in the bow and see a fine sight. It was very dark. One could not follow with the eye the surface of the sea more than 50 yards in any direction. It dimmed away and became lost to sight at about that distance from us. But if you patiently gazed into the darkness a little while, there was a sure reward for you. Presently, a quarter of a mile away, you would see a blinding splash or explosion of light on the water, a flash so sudden and so astonishingly brilliant that it would make you catch your breath. Then that blotch of light would instantly extend itself and take the corkscrew shape and imposing length of the fabled sea serpent, with each curve of its body and the break spreading away from its head, and the wake following behind its tail, clothed in a fierce splendor of living fire. And but it was coming at a lightning gait. Almost before you could think, this monster of light, 50 feet long, would go flaming and storming by, and suddenly disappear. And out in the distance, whence he came, you would see another flash, and another, and see them turn into sea serpents on the instant, and once 16 flashed up at the same time and came tearing towards us, a swarm of wiggling curves, a moving conflagration, a vision of bewildering beauty, a spectacle of fire and energy whose equal the most of those people would not see again until after they are dead. It was porpoises aglow with phosphorescent light. They presently collected in a wild and magnificent jumble under the bows, and there they played for an hour, leaping and frolicking and carrying on, turning somersaults in front of the stem or across it and never getting hit, never making a miscalculation, though the stem missed them only about an inch as a rule. They were porpoises of the ordinary length, 8 or 10 feet, but every twist of their bodies sent a long procession of united and glowing curves astern. That fiery jumble was an enchanting thing to look at, and we stayed out the performance. One cannot have such a show as that twice in a lifetime. The porpoise is the kitten of the sea. He never has a serious thought. He cares for nothing but fun and play. But I think I never saw him at his winsomest until that night. It was near a center of civilization, and he could have been drinking. By and by, when we had approached to somewhere within 30 miles of Sydney Heads, the great electric light that is posted on one of those lofty ramparts began to show, and in time the little spark grew to a great sun and pierced the firmament of darkness with a far-reaching sword of light. Sydney Harbor is shut in behind a precipice that extends some miles like a wall and exhibits no break to the ignorant stranger. It has a break in the middle, but it makes so little show that even Captain Cook sailed by it without seeing it. Nearby that break is a false break which resembles it, and which used to make trouble for the mariner at night in the early days, before the place was lighted. It caused the memorable disaster to the Duncan Dunbar, one of the most pathetic tragedies in the history of that pitiless ruffian, the sea. The ship was a sailing vessel, a fine and favorite passenger packet, commanded by a popular captain of high reputation. She was due from England, and Sydney was waiting, and counting the hours, and making ready to give her a heart-stirring welcome, for she was bringing back a great many of the mothers and daughters, the long-missed light and bloom of life of Sydney homes, daughters that had been years absent at school, and mothers that had been with them all that time watching over them. Of all the world, only India and Australasia have by custom freighted ships and fleets with their hearts, and know the tremendous meaning of that phrase. Only they know what the waiting is like when this freightage is entrusted to the fickle winds, not steam, and what the joy is like when the ship that is returning this treasure comes safe to port and the long dread is over. On board the Duncan Dunbar, flying toward Sydney Heads in the waning afternoon, the happy homecomers made busy preparation, for it was not doubted that they would be in the arms of their friends before the day was done. They put away their sea-going clothes and put on clothes meeter for the meeting, their richest and their loveliest, these poor brides of the grave. But the wind lost force, or there was a miscalculation, and before the heads were sighted, the darkness came on. It was said that ordinarily the captain would have made a safe offing and waited for the morning, but this was no ordinary occasion. All about him were appealing faces, faces pathetic with disappointment. So his sympathy moved him to try the dangerous passage in the dark. He had entered the head 17 times, and believed he knew the ground. So he steered straight for the false opening, mistaking it for the true one. He did not find out that he was wrong until it was too late. There was no saving the ship. The great seas swept her in and crushed her to splinters and rubbish upon the rock tushes at the base of the precipice. Not only that fair and gracious company was ever seen again alive. The tale is told to every stranger that passes the spot, and it will continue to be told to all that come for generations. But it will never grow old. Custom cannot stale it. The heartbreak that is in it can never perish out of it. There were 200 persons in the ship, and but one survived the disaster. He was a sailor. A huge sea flung him up the face of the precipice and stretched him on a narrow shelf of rock midway between the top and the bottom, and there he lay all night. At any other time he would have lain there for the rest of his life, without chance of discovery. But the next morning the ghastly news swept through Sydney that the Duncan Dunbar had gone down in the sight of home, and straightway the walls of the heads were black with mourners, and one of these, stretching himself out over the precipice to spy out what might be seen below, discovered this miraculously preserved relic of the wreck. Ropes were brought, and the nearly impossible feat of rescuing the man was accomplished. He was a person with a practical turn of mind, and he hired a hall in Sydney and exhibited himself at 6 pence a head till he exhausted the output of the gold fields for that year. We entered and cast anchor, and in the morning went oohing and awing in admiration up through the crooks and turns of the spacious and beautiful harbor, a harbor which is the darling of Sydney and the wonder of the world. It is not surprising that the people are proud of it, nor that they put their enthusiasm into eloquent words. A returning citizen asked me what I thought of it, and I testified with a cordiality which I judged would be up to the market rate. I said it was beautiful, superbly beautiful. Then, by a natural impulse, I gave God the praise. The citizen did not seem altogether satisfied. He said, "It is beautiful. Of course it's beautiful. The harbor, but that isn't all of it. It's only half of it. Sydney's the other half, and it takes both of them together to ring the supremacy bell. God made the harbor, and that's all right, but Satan made Sydney." Of course, I made an apology and asked him to convey it to his friend. He was right about Sydney being half of it. It would be beautiful without Sydney, but not above half as beautiful as it is now, with Sydney added. It is shaped somewhat like an oak leaf, a roomy sheet of lovely blue water, with narrow offshoots of water running up into the country on both sides between long fingers of land, high wooden ridges with sides sloped like graves. Handsome villas are perched here and there on these ridges, snuggling amongst the foliage, and one catches alluring glimpses of them as the ship swims by toward the city. The city clothes a cluster of hills and a ruffle of neighboring ridges with its undulating masses of masonry, and out of these masses spring towers and spires and other architectural dignities and grandeurs that break the flowing lines and give picturesqueness to the general effect. The narrow inlets, which I have mentioned, go wandering out into the land everywhere and hiding themselves in it, and pleasure launches are always exploring them with picnic parties on board. It is said by trustworthy people that if you explore them all, you will find that you have covered 700 miles of water passage. But there are liars everywhere this year, and they will double that when their works are in good going order. October was close at hand, spring was come. It was really spring. Everybody said so, but you could have sold it for summer in Canada, and nobody would have suspected. It was the very weather that makes our home summers the perfection of climatic luxury. I mean, when you are out in the wood or by the sea. But these people said it was cool now. A person ought to see Sydney in the summertime if he wanted to know what warm weather is, and he ought to go north 10 or 1,500 miles if he wanted to know what hot weather is. They said that away up there toward the equator, the hens laid fried eggs. Sydney is the place to go to get information about other people's climates. It seems to me that the occupation of unbiased traveler seeking information is the pleasantest and most irresponsible trade there is. The traveler can always find out anything he wants to merely by asking. He can get at all the facts and more. Everybody helps him. Nobody hinders him. Anybody who has an old fact in stock that is no longer negotiable in the domestic market will let him have it at his own price. An accumulation of such goods is easily and quickly made. They cost almost nothing, and they bring par in the foreign market. Travelers who come to America always freight up with the same old nursery tales that their predecessors selected, and they carry them back and always work them off without any trouble in the home market. If the climates of the world were determined by parallels of latitude, then we could know a place's climate by its position on the map. And so we should know that the climate of Sydney was the counterpart of the climate of Columbia, South Carolina, and of Little Rock, Arkansas, since Sydney is about the same distance south of the equator that those other towns are north of it, 34 degrees. But no, climate disregards the parallels of latitude. In Arkansas, they have a winter. In Sydney, they have the name of it, but not the thing itself. I have seen the ice in the Mississippi floating past the mouth of the Arkansas River, and at Memphis, but a little way above, the Mississippi has been frozen over from bank to bank, but they have never had a cold spell in Sydney which brought the mercury down to freezing point. Once, in a midwinter day there, in the month of July, the mercury went down to 36 degrees, and that remains the memorable cold day in the history of the town. No doubt Little Rock has seen it below zero. Once, in Sydney, in midsummer, about New Year's Day, the mercury went up to 106 degrees in the shade, and that is Sydney's memorable hot day. That would about tally with Little Rock's hottest day also, I imagine. My Sydney figures are taken from the government report and are trustworthy. In the matter of summer weather, Arkansas has no advantage over Sydney, perhaps. But when it comes to winter weather, there is another affair. You could cut up an Arkansas winter into 100 Sydney winters and have enough left for Arkansas and the poor. The whole narrow, hilly belt of the Pacific side of New South Wales has the climate of its capital, a mean winter temperature of 54 degrees and a mean summer one of 71 degrees. It is a climate which cannot be improved upon for healthfulness. But the experts say that 90 degrees in New South Wales is harder to bear than 112 degrees in the neighboring colony of Victoria, because the atmosphere of the former is humid and the latter dry. The mean temperature of the southernmost point of New South Wales is the same as that of Nice, 60 degrees. Yet Nice is farther from the equator by 460 miles than is the farmer. But nature is always stingy of perfect climates, stingier in the case of Australia than usual. Apparently, this vast continent has a really good climate nowhere but around the edges. If we look at a map of the world, we are surprised to see how big Australia is. It is about 2/3 as large as the United States was before we added Alaska. But where, as one finds a sufficiently good climate and fertile land almost everywhere in the United States, it seems settled that inside of the Australian border belt one finds many deserts, and in spots a climate which nothing can stand except a few of the hardier kinds of rocks. In effect, Australia is as yet unoccupied.